I think we'll find many, many parallels. Like Socrates, Gautama was also primarily concerned with ethics. And again, just one simple example. This is from the Dhammapada, one of the earliest verse collections of Gautama's teaching. It's verse 183. To not do evil, to practice virtue, and purify the mind. That is the teaching of the Buddha. To not do evil, to practice virtue, and to purify the mind. That is the teaching of the Buddha. There's a text somewhere in the Zen tradition in which a monk asks, or someone asks a monk or a teacher, what is the Buddha's teaching about? And he gets this reply. And the questioner's not at all happy with that. He says, look, a 5-year-old child could have told me that. And the Zen master replies by saying, well, yes, a 5-year-old child could have told you that, but this 70-year-old man is still struggling to practice it. Now, if we take this very simple verse apart, we find that, again, it's suggesting an ethics of uncertainty, because to purify the mind, or we might say to empty the mind, is to purify or empty the mind of views and opinions to which we're attached, to received ideas that we've somehow been brought up with. And we need, as it were, to purify, to empty the mind of these kinds of automated opinions. But in doing so, we're going to remove the security that we know something, that we're certain about something. It brings us back into a condition of radical uncertainty. And yet this radical uncertainty, which has been achieved by emptying or purifying the mind of views and opinions, becomes the foundation of ethics, to not do evil and to practice virtue and purify the mind. We've got here something very close to what Socrates is saying as well. Now, for Gautama, the path of human flourishing, which is the way I like to think of the Eightfold Path in Buddhism, emerges from a purified or non-reactive space, which is that of nirvana itself, a non-reactive awareness in which we come to a stillness, a depth in our experience in which we can just be with this non-reactive attention. And this path that emerges out of that non-reactive space is a middle way that is founded on what I translate as a true perspective. It's usually rendered as right view, but to me always sounds a little bit doctrinaire. A true perspective, samadhi, a complete way of seeing things. Now, when Gautama was asked to explain, the nature of this perspective, this is what he says. So this is from a discourse where he's speaking to a man called Kachanagota. He says, by and large, Kachanagota, people depend upon the binary of is and is not. But the person who has a true perspective recognizes how this basic grammar of language that Aristotle speaks about, something is either A or it is not A. There's no excluded middle. Yet this very structure of language is incapable of grasping the fluidity, the ambiguity, the mystery of the experience that's unfolding within us from moment to moment. It's much easier to assent to the grammar of language and divide the world into opposites, good and evil, for example, or being and non-being, or right and wrong, which then quickly become absolutes, quickly enter into opposition with each other, and thereby become the foundations for conflict. So in practice, this samadhi, this true perspective, requires us to learn how to suspend opinions of affirming something or negating something, and simply come to dwell in this non-reactive space of emptiness. Emptiness in early Buddhism is often presented as the emptiness of the reactive patterns of the mind, letting them just come to rest, letting them just be what they are, and as they're transient, impermanent, contingent things, they'll pass away of their own accord. But this perspective, since it has renounced, as it were, these binary absolutes, right, wrong, yes, no, and so on, means that it is also a state of not knowing and questioning. In other words, if you think about it, to no longer be caught up in the binary of is and is not, is to rest in a state of uncertainty. I don't know what this is, and I don't know what it is not. What is it? Which is a Zen koan, the one that is central to the training one receives in a Korean monastery today. So samadhi, this perspective, is not about gaining some kind of final knowledge about what things really are, the nature of reality or truth or anything. It's rather about learning how to be totally open to the mystery of life itself, to experience that kind of awed perplexity or puzzlement that is not confusing, but it is weirdly liberating. So this discourse to Kachanagota continues. By and large, the Buddha says, this world is bound to its prejudices and its habits. But a person who has this true perspective does not get caught up in the habits, fixations, prejudices, or biases of the mind. Such a person is not fixated on myself, but also this person recognizes fully that when suffering is occurring, it's occurring. And when it has come to an end, it has come to an end. That such a person's knowledge or understanding is independent of others. In other words, we're talking about a perspective on life that has become our own. It's not something we've taken on board because a teacher told us or a sacred text told us. At this point, our understanding of this perspective has become integrated in the very person that we are. So that's one side of an ethics of uncertainty in Buddhism that's focusing very much on the uncertainty aspect. But if we look at another discourse, and this is the Samadhi Sutta, the discourse on true perspective or right view, which is the 9th middle-length discourse, this is how Gautama defines it there. When one understands virtue and the roots of virtue, he says, when one understands the non-virtuous and the roots of non-virtue, in that way, one arrives at a true perspective. So once again, this true perspective is both grounded in uncertainty, it's let go of the binaries of language, and yet it is also precisely where ethics begins. When one understands virtue and its roots, the non-virtuous and its roots, in that way, one has a true perspective. In other words, when one can more clearly and intuitively differentiate between greed and hatred and confusion on one hand, which are the roots of non-virtue, and generosity and love and intelligence on the other, or the roots of virtue, then one is in a position to make a far more clear and informed and loving response to the suffering that one is confronting.